to my heart to sing thy grace. Streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs of ballads praise. Teach me some melodious sonnet, sung by flaming tongues above. Praise the mount I'm fixed upon it, mount of thy redeeming love.
Good evening. My name is Vickie Crabtree, and I'm from Hot Springs, Arkansas. And I see a few familiar faces, and I want to welcome you here tonight. My husband and I were able to take a trip to the Holy Lands the last week of April and the first week of May. And I was laughing and telling some of the people earlier that I took over 1,900 pictures. And to try to whittle that down to 20 minutes worth of sharing took quite a process. So let's get started. I hope this brings you some blessing. Some of you said you've been there already, so it'll bring back some great memories, I hope. Carrie and I traveled with a group of 42 people, and that's what you see here in this picture. In the background, you can see the beautiful city of Jerusalem. Right in front of us is the Dome of the Rock, which is a mosque, an Arab Muslim mosque. It's kind of a point of contention between the Muslims and the Jews, as you can imagine, because that's the holy place where the Jews are supposed to go 3 times a year. And it's not allowed as they would love for it to be. So that's a real point of contention. When you look far, far in the very back of this picture, you can see the new Jerusalem skyscrapers, and they have beautiful architecture. I took a lot of pictures of their very unusual architecture, but that's for another time. The old city is to the center right. You can tell those buildings are a little darker than the ones on the left. That's the old city of Jerusalem. It was a beautiful spiritual place. Second slide there for me, Lori. One of our favorite places to go was Qumran. And Qumran was the site of the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were found in 1946 in this area. If you look at it, all you see is just desert with some caves. The backstory of this place is that a Bedouin boy was herding his flock, and he was throwing rocks up into the holes in the caves, and he tossed a rock one day and heard a crash. And so he scampered up and looked inside, and there were clay jars with scrolls in them. Now, there's a lot more to that story, which we don't have time to share, but eventually the scrolls got in the hands of archaeologists, and they started excavating the site. Over 900 scrolls have been found in this area. One of them with the full book of Isaiah, if you can imagine. I don't even know how long that scroll would be to contain the full book of Isaiah. They also found there was a group of Essenes, Jewish Essenes. They're mentioned briefly in the Bible, that was located up here on top of a mountain. They're very much like what we might understand as monks. And it was an all-male community, and they were the scribes that wrote these scrolls. And when the war broke out between the Jews and the Romans, they believed that the Essenes hid the scrolls in these caves to protect them. The pictures I have on the left, this is now a national park, as it should be. The top picture is the front of the national park area where we went in. And then the bottom picture shows you that this is actually the gift store, but it shows you the clay jars that they would have found inside these caves. Lori. This is the Via Dolorosa, which is the path that Jesus would have walked on his way to the cross. The left side, without people, you see a very narrow walkway. This is called also the Way of Pain. It's 4/10 of a mile. The second picture shows us our group traveling down through here. The third picture is an example of, I was kind of surprised that it wasn't just one straight road. There's lots of twists and turns along that way. And there are 12 stations along that way that mark something that happened. They said 3 times Jesus stumbled. One time he saw his mother. Tradition says one time a woman named Veronica wiped his brow. Of course, we know about Simon, who was chosen to help carry the cross. So if you look on the third picture, that little bronze icon that's up on the top of the building shows, go back a little bit for me, Lori. It shows whatever happened in this particular place. And then that little plaque says Via Dolorosa. And then the last picture is a little alcove. There are a few of those along the way where people can stop and pray or meditate, light a candle, just kind of contemplate what happened in that area. Now turn it for me. This was called the Church of the Nativity. And this commemorates the site where Jesus was actually born. Now, the first picture on the top left shows a little tiny door, and it said that they reconstructed this door to make it smaller because people in the day were running their horses into the church. And so to keep out those large animals, they made the door very small, so we all had to bend over to go in. When we did go in, it opened up into what you see on the far left, the bottom picture. That's my husband, Harry. And it's a Greek Orthodox church. It was very heavily decorated, lots of gold pendants hanging from the ceiling, lots of red velvet everywhere. We stood in line for only about 15 minutes. Now, our guide told us that sometimes they wait 2 hours to go into the spot where Jesus was actually born. But on this particular day, we got there at a good time and we didn't have to wait long. The picture that's showing us going down the steps, you had to actually go down underneath the church. And this was down kind of in a basement area. And when we got down there, I told everybody the spot looks kind of like a fireplace. It has this red velvet and gold tapestry around it. And that star in the center on the floor, in the marble floor, says this is the place where Jesus was born. When we turn around behind us, there's another little alcove there. And this is supposed to be Jesus's manger. When you look at it, you're probably just as confused as I was. I wasn't sure what part of that was supposed to be the manger, because what you see is a marble floor, then there's a step up that's also marble, and then another piece of marble over beyond that, and then there's a gold box. And then above that, there's lanterns or lamps. So I don't know if that's supposed to commemorate the space where the manger was, or if maybe underneath that gold box, there's actually a manger. But this site was it was very different than what I had anticipated. I was kind of hoping that we'd actually save, maybe everything like it would have been 2,000 years ago, but that was not the case. Lori, the next slide, please. This is the Western Wall. Some people know it as the Wailing Wall. The sign on the left tells you what this is. This is a part of Old Jerusalem, the original Herod's temple that was built there. And the picture in the middle shows us around our guide. Everybody has a hat on except the guide. And he was explaining to us the protocol at the Wailing Wall. And he was telling us that the men and the women have to be separated. They don't pray together. The men would have gone around to the left and would have prayed on the left side. And the women went down to the right, which is what you see on the picture on the far right. And when we went down there, we just kind of lined up behind each other and waited on our turn to get right up next to the wall. I was standing behind a lady who was really rocking back and forth, just crying her eyes out. And I inquired about that later to our guide, and he said, well, the Jewish people believe that you use your whole body to pray. And so they frequently rock back and forth. And obviously, whatever she was praying for, she was very moved by that because she was in tears. You can see barely that through the crevices and the cracks, that's where people take their prayers and roll them up and then stick them in between those crevices. We also learned that it's not appropriate to turn around and walk away from the wall. They consider this part of King David's kingdom still, and you never turn your back on a king. And so the Jewish people walked backwards about 20 feet and then turned around and left. Those of us who were tourists obviously didn't know that. And so we turned around and walked out. Nobody said anything, but, we inquired about it later, why that happened. Lori? This is the traditional site of the upper room. Now, this is not the actual building. In fact, I did a little research on this, and it said that there have been many buildings constructed over this site, but it was in this place where Jesus met with his disciples. It's where he reappeared to his disciples after his resurrection, where Thomas touched the wounds in his hands and his side. It's where he washed Peter and the disciples' feet. And it's where they were gathered on the day of Pentecost. This room that we were in was just a great big open room. It's got some beautiful arches at the top. It is now maintained by the Franciscan Order of Friars. In fact, we found out that a lot of the holy places were being maintained by either the Catholic Church or the monks or the friars. This is just the middle picture, or the picture with the open doorway. That's just another way out. There's also a staircase that you can see on the far right. On the far right at the top, there was this sculpture, has lots of different meanings. There's 3 branches to that tree. The tree meaning that Jesus was the tree of life, and then the 3 branches representing the Trinity, and then several other significance or symbols that I don't recall. Lori? This place is called the Chapel of Condemnation, and it's where Jesus would have stood before Pontius Pilate. The top picture on the left tells you what it is. The bottom picture shows us all going into the area. This was a pretty small room. I was kind of surprised by it. Very opulent, but still very small. Jesus would have stood right there between those 2 pillars, facing the table covered in red. And then the last picture is me standing in that spot, and I took a picture. Of course, Jesus wouldn't have seen that tapestry that's hanging there, but he would have been facing Pontius Pilate in that spot. It's a very beautiful room. And I don't know if that's the original or if it's been reconstructed, but it's a very small space. This is the city of Capernaum. And in the scriptures, in Mark, it tells us that Jesus had a home here, but also we know it because Peter had a home here. This is where Jesus did a lot of his ministry. Also, he healed Peter's mother here from a fever. You'll remember that story. It at first fell into the hands of a farmer, and he had cleared off some of the rubble, but the Catholic Church quickly came in when they realized that this was a sacred site and bought the land from him and left the rubble and the ruins as they are today. And this is what you see when you go into or looking at the ruins. There's also a giant synagogue that sits right in the center of the city. That was the norm back in the day for the synagogue to kind of be in the center. I walked all through that, and I've got lots of pictures showing that as well. On the far right is Peter's home. The Catholic Church has built an 8-sided building up on stilts over Peter's home. And when you go into that church, it's very beautiful, and it has lots of wood sculptures and pictures of Jesus and his life and death in those. But this is pretty beautiful and pretty amazing to think that we're here in this place where these things happen. This little plaque at the bottom in the blue on the left says St. Peter's House. You might can read that just on the 3rd line. St. Peter's House is underneath that. Lori? This was my favorite activity or place of all. And this is Hezekiah's Tunnel. And Hezekiah's Tunnel is mentioned in 2nd Chronicles and also again in 2nd King. Hezekiah was a king of Jerusalem. There was no fresh water in Jerusalem. They had to catch the rainwater in cisterns. And so during his reign, there was a spring outside of Jerusalem, and he had men to dig a tunnel to bring the fresh water into Jerusalem. So they started working on each end and met in the middle, and then put this stone that you see on the bottom left there in its place. At the top, it says, "You are standing at the place where the Shiloh inscription, written approximately 2,700 years ago during the reign of King Hezekiah, was discovered." You can see in the middle picture that we're all walking way down deep into the earth. We went way, way down, several levels down. Someone asked me earlier, how far did I think it was from the street level down into the tunnel? I couldn't even guess. I don't have any idea. When we stepped into the tunnel, it was about knee deep in water, but as we continued to walk, you can see here it's just about ankle deep, and got up to about mid in a few places. Still very cold water. It's about 3 feet wide. I'm 5'7", and I had to duck my head, so it's probably 5'5", something like that as far as height. And it's a quarter of a mile long. So we had a great time going through that. Our group started singing some songs, and instead of "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot," we used to sing "Bend Low, Sweet Chariot." It was a wonderful time, and to know that it's still here and it's such an old relic, it's just it was amazing to me. I enjoyed that very much. This is a picture of the Garden Tomb, and I know you've probably seen this picture on maybe postcards or in books or a lot of places. I was surprised to find out that this is one of 2 sites where they believe that Jesus was buried. I just always thought that this was the place, but there was another site that we visited also that is covered over by a Greek Orthodox church. But this one is still very beautiful. You are allowed to go into it. When you do go in, that's the picture on the far right. I was kind of surprised that those are down on the ground. I expected there to be a table up higher, knee high, something like that, but it was actually down on the ground. The center picture shows that it's just a beautiful garden, and they've maintained it really well, and it just is a beautiful place to go and sit and meditate, and just to think about all the things that happened in this beautiful place. This is Mount Nebo. Actually, we were standing, let's see, first, second, the third picture that you see, the big cross, we were standing up here on top of Mount Nebo, looking off at the picture on the right. And this is where God brought Moses when he told Moses that he would not be allowed to go into the promised land. He wanted Moses to see the land that the people would inherit. And so this is the picture that he would have seen. Jericho is there. Also another city, I believe it's Shechem, but I'm not sure. Where you could just see all of the land that's there. The Bible tells us that Moses died on that mountain and God buried him there. The very first picture, you can see that this is maintained by the Franciscan monks. That's Harry and I standing by that little plaque. And then down on the bottom left is a great big tall obelisk of Moses, picture of him. And then in the second set of pictures, the top is the Franciscan monk monastery, I guess you would call it. And as they were excavating that site to put this building up, they found these beautiful mosaics in the excavation site, and you can see those on the bottom second picture. And so they built their building on top of that to preserve these, and there's still excavation going on inside that building to try to recover some of those beautiful mosaics. That big tall cross, go back for me, Lori. That big tall cross stands for the stick that God had Moses to raise in the wilderness to save the Israelites from snake bites. You might recall that story in there. And so that's what that represents. This is 3 different pictures of the Dead Sea. If you're looking at a map, the Sea of Galilee is at the top. The Jordan River runs through the Sea of Galilee and down into the Dead Sea. And it is a beautiful, beautiful body of water. On the left, this is from our hotel that we stayed at one night or several nights. The middle picture, hearing our walking right down into the water, that's our shadows that you can see there. There's no life in the Dead Sea, no plants, no animals, nothing. It's just way too salty. In fact, it's 34% salt, and that's 10 times saltier than the Pacific or the Atlantic Oceans. You certainly don't want to get it in your mouth or in your eyes. We were at a beach area where a lady did get it in her eyes, and her eyes swelled up really big and red, and until she could get that flushed out. The picture on the far right is the picture of the Dead Sea from the Qumran Mountains when we were up looking at the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea is about a mile from the Qumran Mountains, and you can see what looks like salt around the edges of that. This is the Sea of Galilee, and the picture on the left was taken one evening right after we had gotten into our hotel. We walked down to the sea. It was just beautiful that night, as you can see there. The middle picture is early one morning. I took this from our hotel room balcony. You can see that it's a bustling city now. We're in Tiberias is where this is. The Sea of Galilee in the scriptures has 3 different names. It's the Sea of Tiberias, it's the Sea of Gennesaret, and it's the Sea of Galilee. And Tiberias is a city that's right on the coast, as you can see here, and so is Gennesaret. And so that's why it was called by 3 different names. Why they call it the sea when it's fresh water, I'm not really sure, but they do. In the middle picture, you can see there's a walkway or promenade that runs right down the coast, and they have manicured the little green areas with beautiful flowers and made it very park-like, where a lot of people were down there sitting on the benches watching the water. On the far right at the top picture, there was someone out paddle boating. I thought that was interesting. And then the bottom is sunset one night. Very, very beautiful and very large. We had a lady in my Sunday school class one time say, Vickie, I had no idea the Sea of Galilee was so large, but it looks pretty big. This was another one of my favorite places. We went to, this is in Magdala, Israel. And this is the ancient Galilean boat that was found in 1986. I don't know if you've heard this story or not, but I had heard this story, part of it, but I was just fascinated by it. And the story is there were 2 brothers who were fishermen, and they were walking around the shoreline during a drought. And so the waters of the Sea of Galilee had receded quite a bit. And as they were walking around, they noticed these boards sticking out of the mud. And so they tried to pull them out and could not do it. And so they tried to dig it out and then realized that this was part of a boat and that they had found a great find. So they contacted the authorities, who got some archaeologists out there, and they looked it over and determined that, yes, this was a wonderful find. And we saw on video the archaeologist talking about it. And she said, what had preserved this boat from the time of Jesus was the fact that it was encased in mud and covered by water. But she said, as soon as we brought it out into the elements, it would start decaying rapidly. So she said one of her first things that she had to do was to figure out, how can we keep the elements from hurting this great find? So what they ended up doing was encasing the boat in styrofoam and fiberglass, and then they floated it to an area where they could study it and work on it. I also read, I kind of read more about this because I was so fascinated with it, that they soaked it in wax. They preserved it in a wax bath for 12 years before it could be displayed. So now when you go in this museum, and this museum is dedicated totally to this Galilean boat, this is what you see on display. And they have wonderful pictures and videos about the whole process. And then over on the far right, that's a hologram that they showed. They recreated what the boat would have looked like in its heyday. And then they told us they actually had found a mosaic of a picture of a boat that looked very much like that. But it has been carbon dated, and so they know that it was from the 1st century or back in Jesus's time. So that's pretty amazing to me. I just thought that was just wonderful. This is the Jordan River, and the Jordan River headwaters are at the base of Mount Hermon. Now, on the left, you see part of Mount Hermon, and this is also one of the sites of Jesus's transfiguration. There's 2 sites that are that people think it might have been. Some people think it was Mount Tabor, but my research said Mount Tabor was an army camp, a Roman army camp at the time. And so they don't believe it was really Mount Tabor where he was transfigured. They believe it was at Mount Hermon. This mountain had a great big cave on the left side. You can see some people standing in front of it. It had water in it. You couldn't tell how deep the cave was. Those little arches carved in the mountain were pagan temples for idols for some of the people that worshiped in that area. There's a spring that springs up out from under the base of that mountain. You can see it there in the center picture, and that forms or starts the Jordan River. And you can see on the right how it flows from there, and then 3 different tributaries come together to create that Jordan River. We found out Jordan means place of Dan, and this Mount Hermon and the Jordan River is in the land that would have been given to the tribe of Dan. This was another amazing place. I probably took 100 pictures here, if not more. This is called Masada, and I had not heard of Masada before we went. Masada was actually built as the summer home of Herod the Great. Now, Herod the Great was the king that was alive during Jesus's time, and he was the one that had the babies 2 years old and unders put to death. But he had the summer home up on a mountain in the desert. Now, the picture on the where you see our guide with the hat on and the sunglasses, he's standing by a model that shows what Masada would have looked like in its heyday. You can see it had 3 different levels on top of this tall mountain as his summer home. The mountain is so tall, we had to get up there by cable car, and that's what you see on the bottom left is a cable car coming up the mountain. This is also a national park. That's what the sign says on the top left. Some of the ruins that you see, I just pulled out just 2 or 3 or 4 pictures of that. On the big picture in the center, you can see a black line that is kind of halfway down. I don't know if you can see that. I don't know if I can show you where that is. It's down here, Lori. Can you see my marker or my, I don't know if you see it or not. It's down on the bottom of this wall. It's a black line. Yeah, it's kind of right in, it runs from left to right. Do you see this black line right in here? Yeah. Well, that black line stands for everything below the black line was there when the archaeologists got there. Everything above the black line has been restored, and they're trying to restore this area. Now, on the far right, kind of shows, the top picture shows how these rough looking rocks from the desert could have been turned into a palatial palace for King Herod. And what they did was they would take mud and cover these rocks, these rough hewn rocks with the mud like we would use stucco today. And then they would paint it or decorate it either with carvings or tile or something like that to cover up the rough look of the desert rocks. I thought that was fascinating in itself. The backstory to Masada is that when the Romans attacked the Jews in 70 AD and burned the temple, there were 1,000 Jews that fled the area. Fled, is that a word? They left the area and they went into the desert and they took residence in these in the abandoned palace of King Herod. And they were there for 4 years, and no one knew that they were there. They hid out there that long, eating from the food that was in the storehouse and water that was in the cisterns. And then they were discovered. And once they were discovered, the Romans attacked the palace and tried to get them. Because it was up on such a high mountain, they had a really hard time reaching the people. So they built this hill from the ground up to the palace and sent whatever they had, catapult or whatever it was, up to break in the wall of the palace. And the story goes that the night before they actually breached the palace, that the 1,000 people inside sat down and talked to each other about, do we want to become Roman slaves or would we prefer death? And they all chose death. And so they came up with a plan that 10 men were chosen to kill everyone in the city. And then one of those 10 men would kill the other 9. And then that one that was left would fall on his sword. And so when the Romans breached the city, they found the people dead there in the palace, all except for 2 women and 5 children who had hid out and were not a part of that, who told them that story. Now, I went online. That was the story told to us by our guide, who's a Christian Jew, by the way. And I went online to see more details about that. And of course, there's a group of archaeologists that believe that, yes, that happened. And there's a group of archaeologists that believe, no, it didn't happen for various reasons. So if you're as interested in the story as I was, you might want to Google that to see about it. But it was a fascinating story that I never heard before. This was another place that we visited, and I just thought this was amazing as well. We walked a 1/4 mile down into these big, tall canyons. You can see it in the first picture, all of us walking down in there. They have over 1 million visitors every year that go into this place. You can get there by, you can walk, or you can ride halfway down by a horse, or you can go down in a golf cart, $25 a person, by the way, if you want to go down in a golf cart. Most of us walked down and then took the golf cart out. But when you get down into the end of this journey, it opens up to the picture that you see in the center. And that's actually a tomb. And it was the tomb of King Artus IV. And they believe that this place was built by nomadic Arabs called the Nabateans in the 2nd century. And as you go further down into this place, you can see how they lived in the caves in the rock. They created stores. They created a big amphitheater. They had, it was a city of 20,000 people in its heyday. And so that's what you see on the far right, are the openings to the homes that they would have lived in. I went into one of them. It was basically just a earthen floor. It had a fireplace carved in the far wall. And it's just amazing that people had a full city in a place like that. This picture in the center was actually featured in a Indiana Jones movie. So you may have seen that before. Ted says, yes, he recognizes it. The city was first discovered or I should say rediscovered in 1812. Don't you know, when they found this, they thought that it was a really amazing place. And that's the end of it. This is a friend of mine. Her name is Patience. And as she was riding by on her camel, she said, Vickie, take a picture of me. And so I took not only a picture, but a video, but that's her. They had camel rides down in Petra, and it was $5 to ride on a camel. I had actually ridden on one at the zoo, so I didn't get back on one. They're not as comfortable as they look if they look comfortable to you. But that's it. So thank you very much for being patient and for hearing me out. And be glad that I didn't have all 1,900 pictures to show you.
Almighty, gracious God, we feel that you have rained down upon us with your Holy Spirit, allowing us to see parts of the world that many of us will never see in person. We thank you that Vickie could share that with us tonight. But we thank you, God, for allowing us the freedom to worship and truly feel the living water which you give us every day, if we but ask. We thank you that we are your children. You are our God, that you wrap your arms of peace and love around us, no matter what we are going through. If we seek you with an open heart and mind and soul, we can find your peace anywhere within our heart. Father, thank you for being the living God, the living water, and sharing your Son, Jesus Christ, with each one of us. We praise your holy name and we worship you. We ask that you would go with us now, that truly we can share the words with others as we live them, because sharing doesn't work if we don't live it. So may we walk the walk as Jesus led us to do. May we be truly the disciples you call us to be. We pray in Jesus' most holy name. Amen.